Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to episode 91 of the WP Builds podcast. This episode is entitled FacetWP Filtering for Your Site with Matt Gibbs. It was released on Thursday the 30th of August 2018. My name's Nathan Wrigley from pictureandword.co.uk, a small web development agency based in the north of England, and I'll be joined later for our top and tail discussion and ending fact by David Wormsley from davidwormsley.com. A couple of things to say before we start. First thing is, as always, please, if you feel favourably about this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes and made us a 5-star review. You can find the link to iTunes and our page on that platform. If you go to wpbuilds.com and find any of the podcast episodes, there's a whole bunch of buttons underneath the podcast player, one of which is an iTunes button. Also, there's opportunities to share it all over the place, and again, would really appreciate that. If you do feel like being part of the WP Builds wider community, if you go to wpbuilds.com/subscribe, then you can find out all the ways that we can keep you notified. We're not really into spam, but you can subscribe on Facebook Messenger, join the Facebook group, and so on and so forth. There's a Slack channel as well. The other thing I would say is we've got a couple of webinars coming up. We've got Corey Mass from Kanban WP in September, and also in September we've got Arindo Duque from WP Ultimo, which is a plugin which you'll find out more about in the next few weeks, but it's a way of making multi-site turnkey websites. It's great. So yeah, please go and check that out. Also, wpbuilds.com/deals, and you'll be able to avail yourself of some coupon codes for things like Toolset, Main WP, Malcare, BlogVault, and so on. So yes, great. The other thing I would say is, before we get started with David Wormsley and I, the format of the podcast is going to change. At the minute, we've got a discussion, followed by an interview, followed by an ending fact. What we're going to do is we're going to split the podcast up so that possibly alternate weeks, but possibly not, don't really know yet. We're going to do an interview just all by itself, and then a discussion all by itself. So it'll be discussion, interview, something like that. And it'll basically be David and I, but also we've got a few people that we've had on the podcast before and people that we know to join us on the discussion. So hopefully you'll be able to cope with this change of format. It might make the podcast a little bit shorter, which I think is possibly a good thing. And that's going to start from next week. But please, if it upsets you or you think the new format's a load of rubbish, let us know. That'd be great. Speaking of discussions and ending facts, the discussion that David and I are going to have this week is called What's the Lifetime Value of a Client? And at the end, slightly ridiculously, we've got one called Duck Petal Love. You can find out about that by getting to the very, very end. Okay, today we've got the FacetWP developer, Matt Gibbs, on. If you've never used FacetWP before, it's a plugin which allows you to filter things. So, for example, you might have a post type of cars, and you'd be able to filter, I only want to see Audi cars, and I only want to see blue cars. And it works incredibly well, very easy, point-and-click interface with almost like a page builder structure to it these days. It's advancing at a very quick rate. So he's here to talk about that. But let's first of all go to David Wormsley and myself to have this week's discussion. Thank you very, very much for listening to the podcast yet again.
And today we're discussing what's the lifetime value of a client. Now, this is inspired by Seth Godin and a post that he made recently where he was asking, are we still clueless about this concept of lifetime value? So his post is a really short one. Maybe Nathan will provide the link below this one. But what they're saying is, well, what he's saying is, if an Apple upgrade breaks your phone and you switch to Android, it's going to cost Apple more than £10,000 because of the loss of that continued business. So that's what we're talking about with this and trying to put it to the work that we do. So, Nathan, lifetime value, does that really come up in your life?
Do you know what? I don't have a number. I know that quite a lot of businesses, especially like SaaS apps and things like that, they'll have an absolute figure. that they want to achieve, and regard it as poor if they don't, and good if somebody stays beyond that point. So it might be paying for 3 years at $100 a year or whatever it might be. I am working on lifetime value as a thing. I would like people to stick with me, and I make the point very clear in proposals and contracts that I want this to be a partnership, and I'm going to do everything that I can, and it's just going to be me, and you'll talk to me on the phone and all of this kind of stuff. But I don't have a number on it, and I'm probably not as good at this as just about anybody else. I have no idea what that number is, but I do stress the point that I would like you to stick around and work with me over the years to come on anything that you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what? I think I didn't really have an idea of this concept, really, and I don't have any numbers. But I think just by chance, in a way, I've started to think about that. And now I use the term a bit. There was somebody on a Facebook group who posted almost my exact situation. They said the first few jobs that they did were quite a few thousand for those jobs. And that was the same with me when I did it professionally. And then he said that he's now struggling to get anything that's more than a few hundred dollars or pounds. I can't remember what it was. But and I just thought, well, that's exactly my situation. But actually, it's been a happy thing, because what I realized is that if I look back to when I was doing it as a sideline to my main job, some of those old family and friends sites over time have been, because they trust me to do their upgrades and look after their site, over time, that trust has turned into almost as much as those big jobs that I quoted for.
I'm trying something out at the moment, which it hadn't really occurred to me until just now, was me having a go at this. And that's that I've got a client who's come to me and has said, we are not getting the support that we want off our current developer. They've basically gone dark. But we quite like the site, and I've had a look in the back end and so on, and basically it needs a rebuild so that I can manage it, because it's using plugins and things that I don't want to touch, shall we say. So what I've said to them, and I don't know if they're going to bite at this, and I don't even know if this is something I want to carry on. I've said I'm going to rebuild the existing site for you for free, so long as you come on X care plan and you sign up for at least a year. So the principle there is that during the period of a year, so long as they're not crazy with their burdens of calling me up and asking me to change this, that, and the other thing, and they use the provided amount, they'll have been absorbed into the figure that the care plan would have needed over that time if they'd gone on a lower one, and it'll absorb the cost of the build. But all the time, it kind of feels, the way I've framed it is, I'm doing it for free. I'm doing you a website for free. So we'll see how that works out. But that I think possibly is the same thing.
Yeah, I thought it sounds like a good way. I mean, a lot of people do this in a way. They build their models. Obviously, recurring income is the way they might frame that kind of thing. But I think I'm purposely doing it. We talked about this before. You know that there's somebody contacted via my colleague me for a job quote, and it's really complex. It's got a lot of stuff going in there. I think there's a shop, there's booking, there's events, there's blogs, there's vouchers, all of this kind of stuff. And we looked at it, didn't we? And we said it's probably, most agencies would say this is in the 10K range.
Yeah.
That's pounds we're talking in here for a big job like that. But it's interesting, because I'm going to leave this conversation and have a chat with this person, because of the way that I've committed now to this idea of lifetime value. I'm going to say, I'm not going to take the full responsibility and give you a quote. I'll give you an estimate on how long it might take me to do the technical bits of your job, which will be much less than that higher price. But I want a long-term relationship with them. I want them to work with me over a period of time. So I'm hoping, if they go for that, this will build trust, and I will continue to work with them in the long term. Because I actually think, so I'm going on a bit now, but I actually think with the job that they have, I'll be using various WordPress plugins, and I'm sure some of those are going to have problems. And I'm also sure that the technology will change, and there will be a new brief almost as they put the site out live. Things will change what they need.
Do you, when you are building this, are you kind of thinking that you're going to ask them to sign on for a particular period of time, come what may. So, for example, in your head, are you thinking, I'm going to tell them that I'll do the site for a lower fee or free or whatever it might be, and you're going to come on my care plan, and I'm going to insist on 2 years or year or 3 years or 18, I don't know. Or are you going to take the approach of, look, we're just going to offer you something so good you won't want to go away? Or so the question to distill it is, are you going to lock them in or let them just decide that for themselves?
Yeah, let them decide it for themselves. And I think that's maybe the lifetime value concept, isn't it? It's the idea, I think what Seth was saying with the Apple thing, you don't necessarily lock people in as much as you would like to, but they've got to trust you, haven't they? If you break that trust at any point. So hopefully by appearing to be very honest about what we're doing in the first place and appearing to really have their back in terms of trying to keep the cost to the lowest and start with a minimal viable product rather than just go for this big project, it might earn that trust and that will continue then. That's the idea.
So are you going to phrase this that I'll build it slowly, but as soon as we've got the first bit ready, we'll launch it? Or are you going to build it all first and then kind of, well, that's it. It's basically all built and you just do the care plan stuff thereafter?
Yeah, I think you've got a route with this, haven't you? So if they want a quote, I'm probably not going to give them. I'll give them an estimate of what I can do, and they take responsibility for the project, and they book our time, and I give them a good idea of what I can do, and we'll work it out as we go along, and they'll work out what they need. Otherwise, if we do for a quote like most people do, and how I would have done it before, you need to really fully work out the spec. You need to get a proper proposition. That takes time. You need to do a contract, and all of that is biting into the money, plus the fact you take the responsibility for what the client is likely to do. So you have to charge big, where I'm going to try and present the idea that I do it this way so I don't have to quote you big, but you do take the responsibility for the overall project.
Do you have a number in your head then for this lifetime value? Is there a
No.
Or is it? Yeah, no. That's. I'm glad you said that, because that's the same for me. I have absolutely no fixed figure. I think really I'm thinking in terms of months on the care plan. If they've stuck around for 2 years, then that's fine. We've done quite well out of that. But if they stuck around for 2 months and then cleared off, that probably wasn't worth it. But my pricing is much more top heavy. Like I say, it was an experiment trying out this pricing whereby I do the site ostensibly for free. Normally I get them to pay up front, in increments, and then pay before it's finally handed over 100% to cover my time. Then afterwards try and pitch them the care plan. But I'm liking this idea a little bit. We'll see how it works out. If I've got any if it's successful, I'll let you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's really hard to convey to clients. When they come with lots of spec, we know that some plugins can do that very quickly. I mean, we know really we could build somebody a site within a couple of hours with Commerce. We couldn't put all the stuff in there. We couldn't get the design as they wanted it. But as long as it's basic, you could do it in a couple of hours. I can spend more hours than that trying to place a telephone number to the left of a header.
Yes.
And a client just doesn't know that. So, in some ways, I'm taking a gamble and probably stepping behind the curtain in a way with this one and saying, look, this is exposing what we use and everything, but the hope is that I'm not trying to undercut people who will need to quote higher, but just saying, look, join us on this. But we're in partnership now, and I hope that partnership's a long-term thing. I'm not going to say it like that. I'm going to say, we work closely with you. But that's the idea, is to try and get that kind of relationship in the same way that I did with my early websites. That I don't, they are my family and friends that I did earlier websites for, but I'm pretty sure they would drop me in a moment if they thought they were going to get a better deal with somebody else. But they're not, because they trust me probably to have their back, and that's kind of what I want to get into with the lifetime value.
Yeah, I think that's quite an important part. Obviously, the longer that period goes on and the more that they phone you up and you respond and do what they wanted, the more likely you are to gather that trust. And so when it comes time for the inevitable refresh of the website, you could offer to sort of do it for free possibly at that point, because the value is still there and the value is going to be there going forwards. I wonder about this proposal that I've just put out. I'm thinking that on the plan that I have submitted to them, let me just work this out on a piece of paper next to me. Let's have a quick think. I reckon if they stick around any longer than, if I get them on the care plan that I've asked them to, which is a sort of made a different one that's on my website, sort of a bespoke one because of the unique nature of this. I think that if they're with me for anything more than about 19 or 20 months, then I'm starting to see more out of it than I would. But obviously, if I'd have built the website for an upfront fee and got them on the care plan, then that was always going to be the best way of doing it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. But from a client point of view, do you think it's more appealing to pay a smaller amount of time repeatedly, a smaller amount of money repeatedly, or would you rather pay a big lump before the project is released? And I have to say, I think I'm more of the big lump kind of person if I can afford it. For example, with my car insurance, I'd rather pay all of it than have to pay more over 1 year paying 12 monthly installments. But sometimes it just works out that it makes more sense for us and the finances and the way things are ebbing and flowing to pay in monthly increments. I don't really notice it. As soon as I've signed that deal, it's out of sight, out of mind, it's done. So I don't know, from a client point of view, which would be more interesting? I guess you'd have to judge on its merits.
Yes, and I think it's a different thing in a way. If you they know what they're going to be paying over a certain time. I mean, what I'm suggesting is the fact that they don't, so they pay as they need. So I'm taking the gamble, if you like, that on a job like this, they will almost certainly, so that, they want a shop. I'm sure they don't know what that shop needs to do. So they might not know that they need a kind of pricing table that accounts for weight or something like this, an extra job. So these things start getting added with their consent as they go along. But my guess is, and it's a kind of gamble with the particular quote that's come in, I think, because we've done some work for another department of theirs, is that they are finding the usual provider too expensive. So they've obviously moved from who they usually have to somebody else. And they're obviously looking around now to move from the person that they had before. Now, I would guess that this company charges, the higher rate initially, and then that's the job done. And they have to gather the money again to start work on it. So I'm really, the idea with me is that you spend less. It doesn't have to be perfect for the launch. Just get it working, and you'll work it out, and then spend a bit more money and spend a bit more money as you go on, as you need stuff. And I think maybe, it's a judgment call on this one. I'm going that way, and if they don't want that, they want somebody to sit before their board of directors and present a big job, then I'm not the person, and somebody else should do that, and they should charge them much higher for it.
Well, in about 10 minutes' time, you'll be able to tell us all what the outcome was, because, of course, as soon as we hang up this, you're going to go and talk to them. So, yeah, interesting stuff. We've got to about 15-ish minutes. Anything else to add, or shall we move on to the interview?
Yeah, let's do the interview.
Okay, let's go for it. Hello there. Thanks for getting this far into the podcast. You've made it to the interviews part of the podcast, and I'm glad that you did, because today we've got Matt Gibbs, all the way from Virginia Beach in sunny USA. Hi there, Matt.
Hello, Nathan. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Now, Matt is on because of a plugin that I've used before, and possibly some of you have used before. I'm kind of thinking that this will be a good episode to listen to if you haven't heard of it before, because it's incredibly useful in certain situations. So, Matt, do you want to tell us the name of your product and what it does?
Sure. So a plugin I wrote a couple years ago, it's called FacetWP, and it is a WordPress plugin for creating advanced filtering. And so the easiest way I can explain it is like if you're on Amazon and you're trying to find a pair of shoes and you want to filter by color or size or brand, those actual sidebar filters is kind of what FacetWP does. It's a plugin where you can narrow down a list, usually a large list of content, and allow your users to find exactly what they're looking for.
It sounds so simple, but I bet it wasn't that simple to write.
No, it took a while to write this thing and to make it perfect. A lot of intricacies go into not just the filtering aspect, but the faceted search aspect. So when you select a choice, like you select blue, you want to make sure that the other facets, like the size facet and the brand facet, reflect that choice. So if you select blue, you want to make sure only blue products show, and also you want to make sure that only the other choices associated with blue show up.
So when I've been looking around for plugins and things like that, I've come across this term facet before, and I wasn't so sure if that was a word that you'd made up or if that's a kind of a required correct piece of vocabulary for this kind of filtering and searching.
Sure, yeah. So the faceted search is a term, and it just means kind of intelligent filtering. It means taking data and slicing and dicing it so you end up with a smaller subset of that data. I think that's the basic terminology for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to be confused with search then, is it? This isn't your sort of standard search widget in Facebook where you type in a word and it will try to find instances of that exact word and throw it up in a big list. That's not this at all.
Not usually, no. I mean, you can kind of consider search itself as a type of facet.
Okay.
But in general, when I think of faceted search, at least, I think of kind of multiple different pieces of filtering mechanisms that kind of work together in harmony.
It's on your website. There's quite a few really perfect examples. I mean, you've got some video tutorials and also some live demos where you sort of break it down. And the example which sticks really well in my head is cars. So you've got a custom post type, let's say, of cars. And then you've got a whole bunch of custom fields which map to different things. So, for example, the color, the engine size, the model, the make, and so on. And on a normal single page, you would display all those in some way, shape, or form. But what your FacetWP plugin does, it enables you to display elements of all of those custom post types on a sort of single page, like you described with Amazon. And then you've got a whole bunch of ways of filtering down by ticking boxes, sliding things, and so on. And it removes all the ones that are outside of the search that you want.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you click on a brand like Audi, all the other brands disappear. Because you can't have a car that has more than one brand. At least I don't think so.
No.
And so when you select Audi, it'll also show on the other facets, it'll show the range of prices. So you can buy an Audi for up to $190,000. You can see whether or how many of the vehicle types there are. So if you want to see just cars, it shows 17 of them. If you want to show SUVs, it has a couple of them as well. So that kind of really helps users basically determine what they want to find, like what products match what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's kind of, I was really surprised that I've used this plugin a couple of times, and the first time I used it was to build a real estate site. So I don't know what you called it. Realty, is that an American term that you use? Anyway, selling houses. And I was really impressed by the way that, you show pictures of houses below where the searching is going on, and then you've got this box where you do all of your searching. And I was really intrigued that when you filter down, all the other filter options amended themselves so that they were in line with what was currently showing. So, for example, if I set a price of anything below £120,000, all of the other filters would adapt to show only what was remaining. So, it would say, oh, now there's only 3 houses in that price bracket with a garden, whereas before there were 7. And all of the filters adapted. It was really clever. How is this built? What technologies are going on? How does it load this stuff on the front end? Is it loading up the whole lot all at once, or is it only loading the bits that it needs to see? And how do you sort of index it all? I know that's probably a ridiculously large question to ask, but it'd be nice to hear some of the sort of complicated detail.
No, it's an awesome question. So one of my hobbies, one of my passions really is kind of just data, and just taking data, figuring out the meaning, taking all this raw data and putting meaning to it. And so this was like the perfect project for me. I did do a few plugins in the past, and those were kind of in the same vein. But with Facet, I just love taking this data and doing cool things with it. So to answer your question about indexing, what happens is So from the start, you install the plugin. Presumably, you have a whole lot of data on your site. Let's say you have a WooCommerce shop. You have a bunch of products. Each product has data for, color, size, that kind of stuff already on your site. And then you go into Facet and you say, I want to create 2 new facets. For the first facet, I want to select the color attribute for WooCommerce. For the second facet, I want to select size. And then you hit this button called Reindex. And what that does is there's a custom database table that basically stores the required information for each facet. So when you go through the indexing and you click Reindex, it goes through each post on your site. And then for each post, it goes through each facet that you've created. And it just basically pulls all that data in from WordPress and stores it in this index table so that when you load the page, the front end, it's a whole lot faster than if you were to have to make that query each time, using WordPress itself. So it's kind of like a cache, but not really.
Sorry, please continue. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's just kind of like a more efficient way of loading and retrieving the data.
I was really surprised by how quickly it managed to index the stuff on the site for a start. Like you say, you press this reindex button, and I was thinking, we'll sit around for a couple of minutes and see what happens. And it was a few seconds, really. In my case, it was probably because I only had about 100 posts. Is there any situation where this plugin sort of it's out of bounds? 100,000 entries, 200,000, 50,000, where the indexing and the strain on the server might cause it to sort of malfunction, if you like?
Sure. So there's definitely going to be those lower and upper bounds. Like if I get pre-sale questions and someone's like, I've got a gallery with 10 or 15 images, will Facet work for me? In those cases, I usually kind of say it might be overkill for your needs.
Yeah.
Just because if you only have that few content, like I don't know if it's going to be worth your time. But for thousands of posts, tens of thousands, even up to a couple 100,000 posts, Facet will work great. Beyond that, though, like if you have millions of products, that's kind of where we start hitting bottlenecks with the database. If your server isn't powerful enough, like if you only have 512 megs of RAM on your site, that's probably not going to work if you have a million posts. And you're not just going to see that with Facet. You're going to see that with all these other plugins too. Yeah. Maybe even WooCommerce itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of feels to me that if you've got a million products, it's maybe WordPress isn't the place to be. Don't know.
I mean, it could be. I mean, it depends on how you want to kind of square peg, round hole it. I mean, there are options for that. But long story short, MySQL is the database that powers WordPress. And it's kind of a general purpose database. Like it's great at a lot of different things, but it's not excellent at any single thing. You know what I mean? It's kind of great. It's good at everything.
Yep.
But once you get to like the kind of scale that a large site has, like millions of products, that kind of thing, that's where MySQL kind of starts to break down. And there's been a lot of attempts to kind of alleviate that. Like for example, back in 2008, I created this plugin called Pods, which is that it's kind of like a custom fields plugin. I don't know if ACF was around then, but it was kind of around there. And the difference, what separated Pods from the other plugins is that when you create, most normal plugins, when you create fields, it'll just add it to post meta. And so if you have a whole bunch of posts, that's millions and millions of rows in post meta. And when you want to retrieve all that data, it takes a while. So the idea behind Pods was, let's just create separate database tables for each content type. And for each table, you'd have columns specific to each field you want to create. So like, let's say you have an event post type and you have, a start date, an end date, and I don't know, a location. You'd have those 3 columns in your new database table. And that would theoretically make things a lot more efficient.
Yes.
Because you're only scanning, how many events you have instead of, multiplying that by how many custom fields you have and all that stuff.
I think that's how other CMSs handle a lot of their custom post types, for want of a better word. They create tables, whereas WordPress historically never did that because of the legacy of being blogging,
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, speaking of other CMSs, that's a perfect, lovely, beautiful little segue. We had a chat just before we started recording this, and I explained that, as I've said many times before, I was a user of Drupal until about, 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. And I wondered, having a look at FacetWP, there's a beautiful new feature called the Layout Builder, which enables you to achieve everything that you used to be able to achieve, but with I'm going to say a page builder like interface. There's little handles that you can hold and you can move things around and put things in the right place. And it really reminded me, not the page builder aspect, but it reminded me of Drupal views. So, cheeky question: Did you get some of these ideas from Drupal views by any chance?
That's an excellent question. So let me start this by saying that right out of college, I had a job, and that lasted for 9 years. And at this job, we did a whole variety of projects, one of which was we worked a lot with Drupal. And with my work in Drupal, we got to play around with, I think it was Drupal, was it 6 maybe?
Maybe
5?
Yeah, 6 would be about 8 years ago, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we got to play around with views. We got to play around with CCK for the content creation, and all these other things. And what struck me about Drupal was that how darn efficient it was. Like, it was a great system for a developer, but for me at least, it wasn't a great system for the end user.
No.
Because in order to make it look nice for the end user, make it presentable, make it so they can understand, you have to spend so much effort on it. But long story short, the page builder itself was not. I don't know if it was inspired by Drupal, but it's definitely along the same vein as kind of the Drupal thinking, which is interesting because for me, for like a long time, I feel like Drupal kind of had that developer feel to it, where every decision made was kind of based on, how could this make things more efficient from the back end side? Whereas WordPress was kind of like, how can I make this prettier for the end user and easier to add content for someone who doesn't know how to program?
Yes.
Does that help answer your question?
No, that's perfect. I just wondered. There were just some aspects in this layout builder, which I will post I'll post the link below, because you must go and watch this video, and it will give you a very, very good understanding of how it works. There were just some, and I can't really explain it, but there were a few little tricks that you did, and I just thought, that reminds me of it. But it's open source, it's free open source. It's why not? Why not take the idea and run with it? And I entirely agree. I think that Drupal has that sort of developer feel to it, possibly, and WordPress is just far more beautiful. I got sort of weary of the updates between major version numbers. Anyway, let's not dwell on that anymore. But maybe we could spend a couple of minutes describing how a user actually interacts with FacetWP, and possibly from the end user point of view. So let's take the example of cars again, like you've got on your website. Can you go through I think I'm looking at 2, 4, 6, there's about 14 or 15 different options that you've got for ways of filtering. So I'll start us off, and then you could take it from there and talk about some of the exciting stuff you've got in. If you imagine you've got cars, one of the options that you could filter by would be manufacturer. And then you say to yourself, well, how do you filter by manufacturer? Well, you could do a drop down. So you could put all the manufacturers in a drop down list and click on Audi. All the others go away. You could also do radio buttons, and all the others go away, and so on and so forth. But that's not the options that you're limiting it to. Do you want to tell us all the myriad wonderful ways that you can use FacetWP?
Sure. So let's say you're wanting to filter by manufacturer or make. There's a whole bunch of different UI options you could use to display the list of choices. There's the normal checkboxes and drop downs, which you see a lot of. We also have this thing called F-select, which is kind of like an improved version of a drop down, where you can both search and filter within the drop down itself. So like, let's say you click on the drop down, it opens up a list of all the makes, and there's also a search box where you can start typing in, FOR, and it'll pop up Ford, and you just click on that. And you can also select multiple items from within that dropdown. So it's kind of a way if you're trying to add facets and you want it to be mobile friendly, that's a good way to do it.
Yep.
There's also, some other standard ones like a radio button. And what's fun about a lot of these facet types is, especially checkboxes and radio, they're really easy to style. Normally they'd be just HTML inputs, like an HTML checkbox field. But what we decided to do a while back is just to make them standard divs.
Yes.
And add some accessibility stuff to that. But at the end of the day, if you look at the source for a checkbox facet,
yep.
Each checkbox is just a div with a custom background image.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. You just replace the background image, just remove it altogether. If you want to change it from a checkboxes to just a standard text list, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the default one's really nice. It's like a little black circle, isn't it, with a little smaller circle inside of it, and it works beautifully, I think.
Mm-hmm. If you have this doesn't really apply to the make facet, but let's say you have a hierarchical taxonomy. So you have let's say you have a country and a state kind of thing, and you select the U.S. and then you want to have Virginia, North Carolina, California. Those things appear kind of offsetted from the country. You can do that too. There's a couple different facet types you can use. There's one called hierarchy. There's one called hierarchy select. That one's kind of cool where there's two, like if you have a country and state hierarchy, you can select the country and then the state dropdown will fill.
Yes.
So you've probably seen that a lot with kind of like if you're trying to find some tires from a car shop.
Yep.
First you have to select the year, then you have to select the make, then you select the type of car and all that stuff. So it works kind of like that. There's also some other like autocomplete, like you start typing part of a SKU number and it pops up the different choices you can do. But probably the coolest facet types we have are probably one's proximity, and that's basically geolocation. So you first you have to basically geolocate your data, and we have tutorials for that. But once your data is geolocated, a user can go on your site and start typing in, Virginia, and it'll show all results within a certain radius of that location. Mm-hmm. So within 50 miles, within 100 miles, which is great for like a store locator, that kind of thing. And the other one is called the map. It's a map facet. So not only can you display your results on a map, but there's also an option to be able to filter based on the active boundary. And that doesn't really make any sense right now, but let me explain it. Okay, let's say you're scrolling the map. Like you've clicked on the map and you're scrolling it around, or you've zoomed in the map, you zoom in or zoom out.
Yep.
Every action you make will actually refresh not only the results, but the facets. So let's say, you've got a map and it's focused on the United States. So it's like a wide area. If you zoom in to Virginia, it'll only show results within Virginia based on the boundary of your active map, which is probably one of the cooler things we've added recently.
Yeah, really very, very cool feature indeed, and something which would be fiendishly hard to pull off by yourself. And there it is, just sort of thrown in. I have to say, my favourite, which you haven't mentioned, is the slider. I love the slider. I repurposed that to be a pricing thing, so that you just select the minimum and maximum price of a property. And I threw that at the client and said, "What do you think of that? Is that even vaguely useful?" And they were like, "Yes, keep that. We love that." I think that's really good. And also the sort of number range, and you've got star rating as well in there, so that there is an awful lot. And really, all you need to do is create a custom post type and map fields to. Well, maybe you could explain that process better, because I'm going to muck it up.
But basically, you just if you already have a post type, and you already have like ACF or something, you would just create some custom fields.
Exactly.
If you don't already have a post type, you would use this plugin. Well, I usually use this plugin. It's called CPT UI.
That's right. Yep.
Custom post type UI. Basically, that plugin lets you create brand new post types, and it also lets you create taxonomies too. But when you create a post type, you basically just say, what do you want to name it? and what do you want it to show on your admin menu kind of thing. And that's pretty much all the required options you have to select.
Yep.
There's also some other stuff too, but basically a post type, if you're not familiar, is in the WordPress database, there's a table called WP posts. And the only really, Nathan, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only really distinguishing factor between different post types at the WordPress level itself is just the name of the post type.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, it's all just the same table and the same information. But yeah, if you haven't heard of it before, CPT UI is a great plugin. Lets you create post types, lets you create custom taxonomies.
Mm-hmm.
If you need custom fields, we usually recommend ACF.
Yep.
And so, yep.
And so you map those ACF fields, for the sake of argument, to things which are going to display in this faceted search, and then you create a template of all the different drop downs and checkboxes, and then essentially all you do is you that spits out a shortcode, and you stick that shortcode onto a WordPress page, and Bob's your uncle. It's done. It's all there on the page, ready to go with just a couple of shortcodes.
Yep. So each facet is its own shortcode.
Yep.
You just drop it wherever you want to on the page. It can actually go anywhere. It can go in your header, footer, main content, sidebar. And so, like that, a lot of users have a couple filters on their sidebar, a couple above the content, which is pretty handy.
Yep. And then you've got a couple of nice integrations. One of them, which I have used and I think is really great, is with Beaver Builder. So you can seamlessly create these kind of searches within the Beaver Builder interface. It's very nicely done. It really, I mean, it was not hard before, but now it's painless. You just click a few buttons, drag a few things around, and there you go. You've got your faceted search going on. What with all your sort of support things, because even though we're stressing how ridiculously easy this is, I'm imagining that there is a pain point for some people who are just novices to WordPress and maybe have come to it and have only used pages, native pages and posts before, and they're new to custom post types and fields and all of that kind of stuff. Do you have any things which cause friction for them, things that they find difficult that you're going to work on improving in the future?
So anytime we talk about any of WordPress's underpinnings, like WP query, anytime we mention that in our documentation, that does get some raised eyebrows from non-developers. So we have to be very careful about that. When we initially released FacetWP, this was late 2013, I think.
Yep.
So it's been a little while. It was very developer focused. Like there weren't a whole lot of friendly UIs for people who weren't developers, anything like that. But over the years, we've kind of added more and more friendliness for non-developers.
Yep.
To the point now where we've added actually a layout builder, because we've had a lot of questions from non-developers who say, okay, so I can add these facets, but how do I create my own grid and that kind of stuff?
Yep.
And for that, we usually recommended, Beaver Builder because we have the integration. But for all of the good that Beaver Builder provides, there's still that need. So long story short, Beaver Builder, it has this thing called a post grid. And it lets you create the grid. It lets you select what you want to appear. And you can have an image, a title, I think an excerpt, and maybe an author and a date or something. But I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So in terms of designing an actual, like a single result, it's not super flexible. And what we really needed is a way to let users fully design the layout for an individual result. So let's say you have a grid of, you've got, let's say a staff directory, and you have, a 2-column grid with 10 total results per page. You can do that part with Beaver Builder, but let's say you want to add a custom field below their name, or you want to show a different image than the featured image for each result. That kind of thing is really hard with Beaver Builder. And so we just wanted a way to design an individual result. So, I mean, both options are definitely viable, but we just had to focus on, we wanted to make it easier for our non-developer users to build that kind of thing.
Yeah, so this layout builder, is, again, we're referring to something we mentioned a moment ago, but there's just little drop-down options. So, for example, you insert the post title, and there's the post title, and then you link it to the post with a box, and then underneath that you might insert an image, and then you might decide I want it to be 3 rows, not just 1 row. So you go into a field and click 3 rows, and it just puts it all into 3 rows, and you can center things and align them. Is that all? I'm presuming that it is. That all responsive nicely. You know, if you collapse it onto a mobile, those three columns. I keep saying rows. I meant to say columns. Those 3 columns would collapse over to work on a mobile device.
So it is based on CSS Grid, which is kind of
good. Yeah, wow.
The new technology. So it's fully CSS gridized.
Yep.
I don't know.
I think that'll do. Yeah.
But we do have a little bit more work in terms of making it responsive. So we have to figure out what breakpoints we want to set as the defaults. Like, let's say someone has a phone that's only 500 pixels wide. Mm-hmm. We want to set some default breakpoints so that if it's that wide, we want to force the layout to only show 1 column, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which we don't have quite yet because we don't know it's kind of hard to figure out the best answer across every site that we support, or every client site kind of thing. So that part's going to take a little bit longer to figure out, just to make sure that we can make as many people happy as we can. But yeah, CSS Grid it's a great step forward for us, because it means it's something that, yes, while only modern browsers support it, it's something that we can feel comfortable with in the long term. Yeah. That it's going to be good for our users.
Speaking of the layout grid, has that been the layout builder, has that been well received? Has it of the user base sort of taken to it, and dare I ask, has it even sort of like increased the sales because it's suddenly become much more easy than it once was?
That's something I wish I could figure out. I have no idea. We have gotten quite a few compliments about it, about how it'll make things easier for people to set up their sites without having to build their own custom HTML layouts, that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm hopeful that people will find it useful. It took a lot of work, but it was actually really fun to build, because the whole admin area is now based on Vue.js.
Okay.
So it's very slick and kind of responsive.
Yeah.
To answer your question from before about the front end, about how it works, it's all basically when you select a facet, it triggers an AJAX request.
Yes. Yeah.
It goes back to facet's admin area, and it basically just processes the data based on our custom database table. So it's all based on that one table. And then FacetWP spits out the HTML for each facet. And then what happens at the end is we're using jQuery, and it basically just takes each shortcode. Like, there's like a play. We just basically spit out the HTML into each tag, and that's how that part works.
Okay, yeah, well, it makes perfect sense to me. That sounds like the best way to do it. Have you got some features that you're working on currently, or perhaps even a longer roadmap for things that you're going to add down the road, things that people have asked for, or things that you believe it would be improved by having?
Sure, there's a few things actually. Like, one is going to be improving the layout builder, and that's going to take several release cycles. We just want to make it, slicker and long in the long run, and add some more features that users, find useful. Also, I don't know if you've heard, but Google Maps have changed their pricing structure.
Oh yeah.
And for a lot of users on bigger sites, that's a problem. So we're just now starting to plan out what we're going to do for our current Maps add-on. The thinking right now is we'd like to switch that to Leaflet. Have you heard of Leaflet?
No, I haven't.
It's like this open source mapping utility library. And with that choice, it would free us from being fully reliant on Google Maps, and it would allow us to basically let users choose what kind of mapping source they want to use.
Okay.
Whether it's OpenStreetMaps, whether it's Mapbox, whether it's Google Maps. So I think in the long run that'll be really cool to have, and it'll free our clients from a lot of the burden of these new Google changes.
Yeah, I guess there's been a price increase when you're. Is it because you're sort of refreshing the page with the way that you do it, or something, as opposed to it being a static map which loads once?
Yeah, like every time you load a map, it triggers an API
Yeah,
request.
yeah,
It's probably most apparent with our proximity facet,
yep,
actually,
yep, yep.
because every time you make a geolocation request, it makes that call.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
but I think in general, I think it'll be good to switch out of um, Google Maps regardless.
yep.
Um,
The ecosystem for some of those other mapping solutions is really cool. You know, some of them look brilliant, every bit as good. It's just it's the tyranny of the default, isn't it? Everybody just uses Google Maps because everybody uses Google Maps.
exactly.
But I think that some of it's not needed. All of that stuff that you get with Google Maps, hardly any of it is actually useful to you. Oh, that's great. So loads and loads of stuff coming on in the near future. Do you want to just quickly tell us about the pricing structure for FacetWP, so that we got an idea of what we would pay and how many licenses and for how much?
Sure. So there's two basic tiers. There's the basic license, which is $99. It supports 1 to 3 sites. It only counts against live sites. So if you have local staging development sites, they aren't counted against your quota. So that's $99. There's also a $249 tier, which supports up to 20 sites.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're an agency, need more sites or have a multi-site install, that's probably more of an option for you. And also the professional license has an extra bonus. It's got this plugin called user post type. And, out of the box, FacetWP only supports post types, but this user post type plugin allows you to map a user with a post type. So what it'll do is if you have 100 users on your site, it'll go through those users and add it. It'll create a post type for it, and it'll add 100 posts that you can then use for filtering. So you can then filter by, if you want to filter by access level, you can filter by whatever user metadata that person has.
Okay.
Like role, that kind of thing. And so that's another option for people like buddy press groups. I think you can use that as well.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool.
So
Yep, very, very nice. Now, because Matt is a nice person, he's very kindly pointed out that he has a coupon code available. I'm not going to say that this will be around forever because I simply don't know. But if you hear this podcast episode and you get to this point, you can use the coupon code SAVE10. So that's SAVE, SAVE, and then a 1 and a 0. In order to get yourself, I believe, 10% off. Is that applicable against all the licenses you've just mentioned?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you. That's really cool. I would say we've got a minute or two left. If there's anything you want to say, plug, promote, talk about your Twitter handle, whatever, go for it, Matt.
Sure. If you want to reach me about questions about FastWP or anything else, I am mgibbs189 on Twitter. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for coming on today and telling us about your fabulous solution. I'm really, really pleased to have had you on. And you never know, we might get you on another day and talk about something entirely different. Thanks very much, Matt, indeed.
Nathan, it was great talking to you. Hope you have a good one.
And this ending fact, which isn't a fact, it is just a saying. Now, Nathan and I have just met up recently. We met up in Lincolnshire where, we became reacquainted with their phrase, their endearment, which is duck, isn't it?
Yes, in the place where I grew up, if you were to go into a shop and you were a suitably sweet, cute little child and you did something nice, they would say things to you like, "Oh, thanks, Doc." Basically, it's a generic term meaning you person. It's just a term for a person. But the British English language is full of dialect, regional ways of using the word Doc. So, for example, I've heard of the following. Instead of saying thanks, Doc, people will often say thanks, petal.
Yes.
You've heard that?
Yes, indeed.
It's the same meaning. It just means thank you, you person. So what else have we got? Thank you, Doc. Thank you, petal.
Love.
Thank you, love.
Yeah, Manchester's all love.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, petal. Thank you, love. I can't off the top of my head think of any others, but no doubt this is a great one for the comments. If you're in a different part of the world, or if you're in Great Britain and you can think of another way of saying thanks, Doc, petal, love, let us know, because this is fascinating. It's really interesting. But Doc kind of grates with me a bit now.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we could have just done Lincolnshire sayings. One, a warm Lincolnshire welcome is So when are you going?
Yeah.
They like to know where they are.
Yeah. You've arrived now. What time are you leaving? Yeah, that's great. Right. Okay. So please send us some comments. That's great. Also, while on the subject of please go to the wpbuilds.com player and click on the buttons. The iTunes one is especially helpful because of Apple's dominance of the iTunes market. But we'd appreciate a 5-star review. That would be very, very nice. Other than that, it's just for me to say thank you from me, Nathan Wrigley.
Aye, thanks, Ducks.
Thanks, Doc. And we'll see you next time on the WP Builds podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this week's cheesy music.